And our next talk today will be by David Bressoud from Macalester College, and some of you may have heard some of his stuff on calculus. Today he's going to give us an update on the characteristics of successful programs in college calculus, some preliminary findings. So let's welcome David Bressoud.
Thank you, Angie. I want to start out by thanking Harry Lucas. This is just a tremendous gathering. I'm so happy to be able to come back year after year and just hear the great presentations that we've got here. And I especially appreciate this opportunity to talk about the calculus study that the MAA has been running with sponsorship from the National Science Foundation. So we're calling the program Characteristics of Successful Programs in College Calculus. I'll talk a bit about the program. Some of the data that we've collected. We've got a huge amount of data that we've gotten so far, a lot more that we're going to be collecting over the next year, but at least there's some preliminary findings that have got both some good news and some bad news for those of us who are interested in moving the profession forward toward inquiry-based learning and a lot more active learning in the classrooms. And also I think there's some ammunition that we can carry back to our institutions. So the program itself, it's sponsored by the National Science Foundation. I'm working with 4 co-PIs, Marilyn Carlson at Arizona State University, Vilma Mesa, who's here from the University of Michigan, Michael Pearson, who is now director of the MAA and is also here, and Chris Rasmussen at San Diego State University. 2 phases to the study. The first phase was conducted in the fall of 2010, and it involved a large-scale national survey of what's going on in mainstream Calculus 1 in our colleges and universities across the United States. We've used that survey information to identify 16 calculus programs that seem to be doing something right. And this fall we're going to be making visits. We've got a team of 3 people who will each be making a 3-day visit to each of the 16 colleges and universities to find out what's going on at those institutions. The experimental design for the survey that was conducted in the fall of 2010 was exceedingly complex. If we had to do it over again, I think we would have tried to simplify the procedure a little bit. But as you can see, it was 7 steps. We started out by doing collecting a random sample of colleges and universities across the country, contacting the chairs of the math departments there, getting the departments to sign on to participate in the survey. The chair answered a few questions about the institution, and then from there was an online questionnaire for the calculus coordinator, who of course was often the chair of the department. So we had questions for the coordinator about the nature of the course, the size of the classes, who was going to be teaching it in the fall, general approaches to teaching calculus. We then contacted all of the instructors who were teaching calculus that fall, about a week or 2 before classes began, to find out what their background was, how often they taught calculus, what their approach was going to be, what kind of use they'd make of technology, and things like that. Then at the end of the 2nd week into the beginning of the 3rd week, we had them have all of their students go online to answer a student survey where we were gathering information about the students. What was their mathematical background? What kind of expertise did they come to these classes with? What were their expectations? Why were they taking calculus? What did they intend to major in? What were their attitudes towards mathematics? Then toward the end of the semester, we went back and we had the students go online again. We wanted to find out what their experience had been of the class. What did they actually experience during the semester? And then we also surveyed them a 2nd time on their attitude. So what were their intentions for their career, for going on in mathematics? What did they think of mathematics? We're interested in how that changed over the course of the term. Then right after the term was over, we went back to the instructors again. We had an online survey for the instructors, reporting out on what they said actually happened, also collecting grades from them for the students in their classes. And then finally, we collected final exams from the instructors who were involved in the survey. So initial survey responses, we had 168 colleges and universities participating in the survey. There were a total of 660 instructors. These represented almost 900 Calculus 1 classes. These 660 instructors that term were teaching 34,000 students. There was no way of compelling the students to go online, so our response rate was lower than we would have liked, but we still got a good sample of students in the Calculus 1. There were 14,000 out of the 34,000 students who actually went online and filled out the surveys for us. And mostly what I'm going to do is talk about some of the things that we learned from those surveys, getting a snapshot of what was going on. Mainstream Calculus 1 in the fall term. We were looking at students at large research universities, at comprehensive universities, at small undergraduate colleges, and also at two-year colleges. One of the things that we found, perhaps not too surprising, is that most of the students across the country who are taking calculus in college have already completed a calculus course while in high school. 61% across the country. That, of course, is going to vary a great deal from institution to institution. Some places have very few students who've seen calculus before. There are many other colleges and universities where virtually all of your students have taken calculus before. But on average, across the country, it's over 60% of the students sitting in Calculus 1 have completed a calculus course, and over 60% of those who completed calculus while in high school earned an A in their high school calculus class. So they've not only seen it, they've done well in calculus before they've come to you. For 69% of those who took calculus in high school, it was an AP calculus course. For those who took an AP calculus course in high school, over 80% of them actually took the AP calculus exam. And of those who took the AP calculus exam, 60% of them earned a 3 or higher on the AP calculus exam. That comes out to 20% of all the students sitting in Calculus 1 have had calculus in high school, taken the AP exam, and earned a 3 or higher. 1 out of 5 of all the students taking calculus in college have already earned a 3 or higher on an AP calculus exam. What we found was that the students coming into calculus in college are good students. The average SAT math score, 652 with a standard deviation of 76. The interquartile range on the SAT scores is 610 to 700. So these are students generally who are in the top 20% of those students with math scores coming into college. 95% of the students coming into Calculus 1 believe they have the knowledge and abilities to succeed in this course. Hopefully. They're coming into it. They're confident that they'll succeed. 89% of them find using reasoning to solve math problems a satisfying experience. They come in and they say they want to be able to reason through the problems. That's what they enjoy doing. 83% of them said that they enjoy mathematics. And one figure that actually surprised me is that almost 2/3 of the students taking Calculus 1 said that they would want to be in that course even if they didn't have to be in it. Almost 2/3 of the students said that they would like to be in that course. Now, this is at the beginning of the term. They said that they would like to be in that course even if they didn't have to take it. But they're coming in with experience of calculus, with success in calculus. They like doing mathematics. They like being challenged in mathematics. They really want to be in this class. One of the things we asked them on a Likert scale, whether you prefer to make sense of the mathematics rather than simply memorizing it. Probably not too surprising, an overwhelming majority of the students said they'd much rather make sense of the mathematics rather than memorizing it. 72% said that they see the role of instructor as helping students reason through the problems, not showing the students how to work the problems. Almost 3/4 of the students see the role of the instructor as helping them learn how to reason through these problems, not simply learning how to do them. 58% of the students who come in expect to earn an A in the course. Needless to say, the actual rate of A's is not 58%. This actually is the very first time I'm aware of that anybody has collected national data on the grade distribution of Calculus 1 across the country. And what we found is that across the country, the grade distribution was 22% A's, 28% B's, 23% C, and 27% D, F, or W. So that's the average across the country. 50% of those who come into the remember 58% think they're going to get an A. Only 50% get either an A or a B, and it's over 1/4 of the students get a D, F, or W. It's also interesting, as I said, it was 20% of the students coming in to Calculus 1 have already earned a 3 or higher on the AP exam. 22% of the students in this Calculus 1 actually earn an A. Now, that's not a one-to-one correspondence between those who've gotten a 3 on the AB exam or the BC exam and those who get an A in the course, but one can understand why a student coming into calculus who hasn't had a good calculus course in high school really feels at a strong disadvantage, because they look around and they see all these students who've not only had calculus in high school, they've done really well in calculus in high school, and they know they're competing against those students. And if you've got a place that's grading on a curve, there's reason to be afraid if you're competing against students who've had a lot of success in calculus before. There also is good news, bad news as far as the instructors go. From the instructor surveys, we asked the instructors what they see their role as, from one extreme, which was to show students how to work problems, to the other extreme, which was to show students how to think about the problems and reason through them. No instructor said that the role of the instructor is simply to show how to work the problems. The instructors really believe that their role is, as you can see, almost everybody on the Likert scale came down toward the end of helping students learn how to reason through the problems. But then we asked them about their attitudes towards lecture. And this is a good news, bad news. The bad news is that a majority of those teaching calculus think that students learn best from lectures. It's a clear majority. As you can see, it's down around 60–65% of the instructors think that students learn best from lectures. The good news is that those who strongly agree with that statement is relatively small. It's only about 7% of instructors strongly agree that students learn best from lecture. What we've got is that the plurality, about 37% of instructors, only slightly agree with that statement, which means that we've got the opportunity to move them. At least they're fairly close to the edge of perhaps lecture is not really the very best way of teaching students. We also asked the students about what goes on in a typical class. We asked them the degree to which they agreed with the statement that they were often lost in class. Was that never, sometimes, about half the time, most of the time, every class? A disconcertingly large number of students were often lost in their calculus classes. We also asked how often it was that they simply sat there and wrote down whatever was put up on the board for them. And for over half of the students, they spent over half of their time just copying what was written up on the board for them. So it's clear that most of the instruction in the United States is this kind of somebody standing up at the front, putting up the results, and the students copying it down. That is still where we are for most of the calculus instruction going on. As I said, we surveyed student attitudes at the start of the term and again at the end of the term. The one thing we were most interested in is learning how that changed over the course of the term, the quarter, or the semester, and trying to figure out what actually improved student attitudes towards mathematics, improved student desire to continue on with mathematics. The statistical analysis is still being done. Some of it has already been done. The people who are leading the statistical team are Phil Sadler and Gerhard Sonnert at Harvard University. The dependent variables that we were looking for, there are lots of ways of measuring the effectiveness of a calculus class. We thought about going in and doing some kind of actual testing of the students, maybe the calculus concept inventory, and we realized on the scale that we were looking at, it was just impractical to try to get all of these instructors to ask a common set of questions that the students were responsible for answering, actually testing the students on their knowledge of calculus. We would have loved to have done a longitudinal study where we had an opportunity to go into the next semester and find out what happened to those students. That also was not possible within the framework that we were working. So what we focused in on was student attitudes. What happened to student intentions, to student attitudes during this course. And so our dependent variables, there were 5 of them. The first was a measurement on a Likert scale of their agreement with the statement, "I am confident in my mathematical abilities." The second was their agreement with the statement, "If I had a choice, I would continue to take mathematics." The third, "I enjoy doing mathematics." The fourth, "I intend to take Calculus 2." These were measured at the start and the end of the term. We were interested in how their attitude shifted during the term on these questions. And then there was also an additional question asked at the end of the term, the level of agreement with the statement, "This course has increased my interest in taking more mathematics." There was a very strong selection bias for the students who completed both the pre and post survey. Needless to say, the students who withdrew from the course, almost none of them actually completed the survey at the end of the course. Also, the students who were getting D's and F's, for the most part, they weren't doing anything at that point, and so they didn't answer the survey. So our initial grade distribution, as I mentioned, or the grade distribution of the entire student population, was essentially flat, a quarter A's, quarter B's, quarter C's, quarter DFW's. For those who completed both surveys, the grade distribution was basically 40% of the A's, 40% were B's, 20% were C's. So basically, we lost about the bottom 40% of the students taking Calculus 2 are not in this survey. So we're really looking at the top 60% of the students who were in the Calculus 1, and we're looking at what happened to that top 60%. Control variables that we measured, we looked at gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity. We looked at their high school background, the math courses they'd taken. If they'd taken calculus, what kind was it? Was it dual enrollment? Was it AP? Was it IB? Was it something else? If it was AP, did they take the exam? If they took the exam, what was their grade on it? What was their last high school math course? What was the grade in their last high school math course? What were their SAT and/or ACT scores? And for college work, we looked at their prior college mathematics, their year in college, their career intentions, and then, of course, for those variables for which we measured both the beginning and the end of the term, we were interested in the preterm value so that we could measure the change rather than simply what the final value was. Lots of independent variables that we looked at as possible explanations of shifts that we saw during the term. Some of the variables were supplied by students. This is just a few of the most significant ones. Student beliefs and attitudes about learning mathematics, student study habits, level of intellectual engagement with the course, student experience with technology, student perceptions of the instructional practices. This was very interesting. One of our graduate students is exploring this in depth right now, the difference between what the instructors said they did during the term and what the students said happened during the term. So we're going to be looking at that in a lot more detail. Student perceptions of instructor use of technology, student perceptions of the assessment practices, and also the intellectual community that the student found outside of class. What kinds of study groups, who organized them, how were they constructed, what was going on outside of the classroom. From the instructors, we learned about the class size, the level of instructor experience, instructor background and degrees, instructor beliefs about how students learn, their attitudes, instructors' interests in teaching, what assessment practices would be used, what kind of out-of-class interactions were available for the students, use of technology, what textbook was being used, what additional materials were being introduced. From the calculus coordinator, we learned about the placement procedures, we learned about technological support. We also learned about institutional support for the students and institutional support for the instructors. So we've got an incredible database of information about all of these classes. What we found in the 4 variables where we measured them at the start and the end of the term, this is student confidence, student enjoyment of mathematics, student desire to continue with mathematics, and then specifically student intention to continue on to Calculus 2. What we found in all 4 cases were negative effect sizes, that those went down during the course. Of course, all we're measuring here are correlations. We can't say for certain that it was entirely the calculus course that caused this. But what we did see was sharp drops. The sharpest drop was in student confidence. Student confidence had an effect size of almost a negative 0.5. That means that student confidence dropped by about half a standard deviation from the start to the end of the term. And these are not all of the calculus students. These are the top 60%. Saw their confidence drop by essentially half a standard deviation. In the case of enjoyment of mathematics, it dropped by about a negative 0.3. If I had a choice, I'd want to continue with mathematics, dropped by about 0.1, and intention to continue on to Calculus 2 dropped by about 0.2. Not surprisingly, the preterm survey value was the greatest single predictor of the post-survey value. If students came in very confident, they were more likely to finish confident than if they came in with weak confidence in their mathematical ability. But some of the other predictors are interesting. What we found is that science majors generally did better than engineering majors or those who were in neither science nor engineering. We had substantial effect size on this course increased my interest in mathematics. Being a science major had an effect size of about 0.5 on that variable. Their enjoyment of mathematics, the effect size was close to a plus 0.3. Desire to take more mathematics, an effect size of plus 0.25. And on their confidence, an effect size of plus 0.2. Now remember, confidence went down with an effect size of 0.5 overall, but the science students were 0.2 above where everybody else was. So for science students, their drop in confidence was only about 0.3 of a standard deviation, as opposed to half a standard deviation, which it was. So what we're looking at in confidence is that students were asked to rate their confidence on a Likert scale. And what we found was, looking at the distribution at the beginning of the term and the distribution at the end of the term, that those distributions dropped by half a standard deviation. For those students in science, it didn't drop by as much. It only dropped by about 0.3 of a standard deviation, which means that for the other students, it was dropping by more than half a standard deviation. And again, what we're looking at here, I mean, the exact values are not as important as the overall effects. We're looking for correlations in what seems to be explaining what's going on. One of the things that had a large effect size was the sex of the person answering the questions. Males tended to maintain their confidence much more than females did. I mean, it's huge. The effect size on confidence was 0.2. Desire to continue on to Calculus 2, being male, had introduced an effect size. So if you look at the distribution of the men versus the distribution of the women, a difference of 0.6 standard deviations between the men and the women. Desire to take more mathematics. If you're male, you're more likely to maintain a desire to take more mathematics. If you're male, you're more likely to have had an increased interest in mathematics. Taking AP Calculus also had a large effect size, especially on student confidence. Those who had completed a course in BC Calculus essentially didn't lose any confidence when they took Calculus 1 in college. Now, if they took BC Calculus in high school, you may wonder why they're taking Calculus 1 in college. But Calculus 1 did not destroy their confidence in the way it did for other students. Even taking an AB Calculus course gave a relatively small decrease in the level of confidence of those students.
Any information about textbooks?
So far, all we have about textbooks is the distribution of what the titles are. And I don't think it's to anybody's surprise that Stewart was the runaway winner. It's about 45% of all of the calculus taught in the United States is taught with some form of Stewart's calculus. That actually, it's the first time anybody's gathered that kind of data. Interestingly, the Harvard calculus came in second. It's about 1 out of 6 calculus courses are using the Harvard materials. The rest of them were very small percentages, 3, 4, 5% of all calculus courses are being taught with each of the other books, that or even less. Sadler and Sonnert also did a factor analysis to look at what aspects of what was going on in the classroom maintained student confidence. So since this was the variable that dropped the most over the semester, we focused in on student confidence. And what they found were 2 large groups of questions that had a strong impact on student confidence. And the first group of them we've labeled good teaching. They all simply happen to correlate very closely together. They tended to have the same kinds of explanatory effects. But the sorts of things that came under this, the classroom practices or the classroom experiences that predicted that students would maintain their confidence in mathematics, are things like instructors who listened carefully to my questions and comments, allowed time for me to understand difficult ideas, presented more than one method for solving problems, asked questions, discussed applications of calculus, encouraged students to seek help, frequently prepared extra material. So these are all the kinds of characteristics that were highly correlated with students maintaining or increasing their confidence. Assignments were challenging but doable. And then another set of practices in the classroom that had an interesting effect because it interacted with good teaching. Things like my calculus instructor required me to explain thinking, required students to work together, had students give presentations, held class discussions, something that we've labeled progressive teaching. But these sorts of things had a significant interaction with good teaching. So the first one are really, I think of Jonathan Hodges' talk last night about respect for your students. The good teaching is really about respect for the students. Those teachers who have it and add these class discussions, group work, and so on, that then improved the student maintaining confidence or increasing confidence in their mathematical ability. On the other hand, for the teachers who did not have that basic aspects of good teaching, who did not have that kind of respect and enthusiasm for the course, if you add group work on top of that, that actually makes things worse in the classroom. And we found that very strongly from the data that came out of this. Just want to say I see that my time is up, but I'm going to quickly go through a few other things. Chris Rasmussen and his students have looked at switcher analysis. The students who came in with the intention of majoring in a STEM field and going on and taking Calculus 2, who by the end of the terms changed their minds. And what we found was that 1 out of 8 of the students nationally who came in with an intention to go on in Calculus 2 and an intention to be a STEM major changed their minds over the course of Calculus 1. Women were twice as likely as men to change their minds about continuing on. At research universities, the percentage of those switching out of a STEM major was much higher. We found that there was a big difference between how the students viewed mathematics. If by the end of the term they saw mathematics as being about making connections and forming logical arguments, they were much more likely to stay in mathematics and stay in STEM than if they saw mathematics as a matter of learning how to solve certain problems, a matter of mastering certain procedures. That kind of approach really killed a lot of students' interest in continuing in a STEM field. Well, all of this is on my website, so you can download this. I'll put up the URL at the end. Just a quick mention of some analysis that Marilyn Carlson and Michael Tallman did of the final exams. We asked the students to rate, we asked the instructors to rate their exams about the distribution of the kinds of questions. And then we actually looked at the final exams and we looked at the distribution of the kinds of questions. What the instructors said that they were doing, the instructors said that 40 to 70%, the interquartile range was 40 to 70%, of their exams were straight procedural questions. What we found when we actually looked at the exams was between 70 and 90% of the exams were straight procedural questions. So a few takeaways: students who arrive in Calculus 1 have high levels of interest in mathematics and a real desire to understand it. Secondly, from the start to the end of the course, there is a dramatic drop in student confidence. This is especially pronounced for women and also for students who have not had calculus in high school. The single greatest factor counteracting this trend, this drop in confidence, under the control of the instructor, is the quality of teaching as viewed by the students. Fourth, instructors tend to favor lecture formats. Most students are not engaged by lecture formats. And finally, assessment for most calculus classes is dominated by recalling and applying procedures to an even greater extent than instructors are aware. Here is the URL. If you go to my website, there's a link to my talks, and there are other talks I've given on this. I can talk for 2 or 3 hours on what's come out of this study, but I hope it's given you a taste of what we're learning about calculus. Thank you.